Hello folks, I'm Esther Emery. Many of you know me from the DIY channel Falchamatic Off-Grid, but today you're on my personal channel and it's a Thursday. I am really getting to enjoy Thursdays, a day when I don't have very high expectations, and I certainly don't do a whole tutorial. We just enjoy ourselves by having a little talk, a little story. And I encourage you, if you have such a thing, to get a cup of tea and maybe a project. Today I'm going to share about authenticity and another piece of my story. I thought it might be kind of fun to sit in the barnyard here with the things that barnyards have, both for the fun background and also to tell a story about authenticity. Many of you have seen a video, or at least know of a video on my other channel called Why I Quit Homesteading After My First Year. That was one of the videos that really changed my YouTube experience from being somebody who just shared for the joy of sharing to someone who had an audience to be accountable to. And that's another story. We'll talk about that another day. But that video received as much criticism as I think appreciation, or very nearly as much, because I was very blunt about some of the harder things about homesteading, and also possibly some of the things that are ineffective about homesteading, depending on what it is that you want to accomplish. But I didn't, even in that video, tell the story of what really ended up being the hardest moment for me, which was not ever any day on the homestead. It was not the winter without any electricity and my 3 kids in a tiny space. It was not carrying my own water for all winter long for 3 years. It was not dealing with our own wood or having a really kind of dramatic failure in the garden our first year, and moderate failures or challenges since then. None of those things have been the hardest thing. The very, very hardest thing for me was the summer after I decided to leave the homestead. And although I wasn't feeling that that was necessarily a permanent thing, I went away to town for a couple of months, and those were the hardest months of this entire experience for me. Once again, it wasn't a particular physical hardship. It was a much harder thing than that, which is lack of direction. To me, and this may be resonant with others, there's just nothing scarier in the world than not knowing which way to swim. You know, feeling like you're in the middle of the ocean and you don't know which way is land. And that definitely is how I felt. And the reason I wanted to share that today is that I feel like one of the things that homesteading really has going for it as a construct, as much as I have criticisms of the whole idea, and I have criticisms of kind of the following that it has, or some of the fantasy around it and kind of imagination of what it could be and how that relates to what it actually is. But setting that aside, let's talk about what I think is really good about the homesteading construct, and that is that it gives you direction. In a world and life and human condition in which it's very hard to know which way to swim, having a little plot of land, which you can just put as much energy as you can into caring for, is such a great way to use your capacities in one direction. So there I was, back in town, theoretically happier because I had electricity again, and because I had TV for my children, and we went to the library every day, and I had access to the things that are theoretically good for a family. But in fact, to an extent that you would hardly believe unless you were there, I was not very functional that summer. I was in fact kind of paralyzed by what you might call some depression, or just a really intense lack of direction. And it became clear to me that whether or not setting up a homestead in the mountains of Idaho was the right thing to do, it was my thing to do. It was my path that I had already stepped out on, and it was time for me to have the maturity to return to my path and walk forward one step at a time, going down that path, even if I couldn't do it in a heroic manner, even if I couldn't be the best at it even if I couldn't necessarily prove that it was the best thing to do. It was the direction in which I was swimming, and I needed to get back to it. Nick and I talk a bit on our other channel about the challenge of being responsible for prioritizing every moment of your day, which I think people underestimate, and I think people continue to underestimate it, which is why I say it over and over again. It's completely true that Nick and I fall back into old patterns. It takes so much maturity, moment by moment, to keep challenging yourself when there isn't some other force that's forcing you to do the right thing. It's harder, I think, than you know until you're doing it. And I think that's something that other people experience. That's certainly not something that Nick and I have invented or discovered. But it is something, it's a dynamic that's very much a part of our lives. That we will set goals for ourselves and then find that even in that process of setting goals for ourselves, that we easily lose sight of our goal. So I do appreciate about homesteading that it is a way to choose a direction, to choose something to love. And I do think that expressing your love and care for example, an acre of land or a quarter acre of land or 3 or 15 acres of land and everything that inhabits that is a good construct for expecting the most of yourself and growing into a good version of yourself, or maybe the best and most human version of yourself. So what can I offer after a few years of trying and sometimes flailing, but also finding and also discovering and growing? What can I offer? I think to do that, I'd like to tell a story. And this is about my son's first preschool teacher. So the first preschool teacher for me of my children. I love education. I love teachers. Have possibly a little too much appreciation for teachers because I have so much appreciation for knowledge and for research. Many of my favorite people in the world are teachers. So when I met my son's preschool teacher, I was predisposed to like her, but I also certainly had reason to. Very, very warm, very comfortable, very put together, very much able to follow a process, but also flexible enough to really see the children under her care. I felt, here's someone who's going to understand Milo's somewhat odd, but also wonderful ways. And I certainly was right about that. I also noticed about this wonderful preschool teacher, although I didn't think anything of it, that she wore a great deal of makeup, that she was a very attractive person, very put together, and that she was probably every day wearing false eyelashes. Now, this didn't really faze me at all. I come from a theater background, and I'm very accustomed to watching people completely transform based on what products they put on themselves. And I have always thought that they are beautiful both ways. It's just one way is appropriate for under stage lights. So I wasn't fazed by this at all. But of course we live in the same community. And I used to, in those days, have Saturday mornings as my kid-free time. I was a stay-at-home mom, very small children, and that can be a hard time depending on how many resources you have or how much family you have around. And Saturday mornings were my free time when I could get away. I would leave very, very, very early in the morning and go to the closest place that had internet, which was a Panera Bread. And I'd sit in a corner booth and I'd have my writing time and my thinking time and my coffee. And one morning while I was sitting at this Panera Bread, the preschool teacher came in with her family, and she had teenage kids and a husband, and she was in her sweats and she didn't have her makeup on. And she saw me and she recognized me and she froze and she did not acknowledge my presence. And I was so heartbroken by that. I guess ever since then I've wanted to say to her, I already thought she was a hero, with or without her makeup. I already thought she was a hero just for hanging out with 3-year-olds all day, for goodness sake. And then on top of that, that she also made an effort to make herself beautiful, made an effort to make an appearance that she found to be of value, and to give herself, to make it clear that she valued her job and found it important. It has always made me sad that I couldn't have just said to her, I see you and you were already beautiful. Sometimes, though, that seeing someone in their moment of vulnerability is not actually an act of kindness. So I don't necessarily regret the choices that I made, but I do think of her often, and I do think of the gift that she could have given by being herself on an early Saturday morning bagel run with her family, thinking she couldn't possibly meet anyone she knows. We've all been there. As she was in the classroom, being a brilliant teacher to our precious children. I think that something we can offer to each other in trying to find our way through the maze of imperfect options is the shades of gray, the complexities, the tensions. Being able to say that although I am off-grid in one sense, in terms of being off the power grid, there's still a lot of dependency in my life. And I find those dependencies actually to be necessary and potentially a source of health. I don't think that finding mental freedom necessarily means breaking your family away from all kinds of community. And yet I also am aware that I carry those things in tension. And it isn't always perfect makeup. Sometimes it's a very cracked, fragmented picture that I can show as I am struggling to work through one thing and the next. Likewise, as Nick and I are working out how to prioritize our time, how to use our energies, we do find that even as we are pioneers stepping forward into making our best lives, we also have a tendency to repeat patterns that we've had our whole lives. We also have a tendency to do the easier thing. We are just as likely to fall into old addictions. I continue to have a tense relationship with my social media, as I always have. I continue to have questions and concerns about how I am a public person versus how I am a private person. We continue to have questions about who we are and how to be our best selves, which moving to the woods didn't take any of that away. What moving to the woods has done for us is give us a direction to swim so that I don't repeat that experience, that feeling that I had that one summer in town of being at sea and powerless. So I wish you today to be able to find a direction in which to swim and the confidence to keep going, whatever obstacles may come your way. And I hope that you will do someone else the favor of showing some complexity in your life so that we can help one another to get through the maze of options that is life today. I'm Esther. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.